All right, what's going on, everybody? Go ahead and get started here. All right, so we got a question here from Tom S. Says, Q, having trouble keeping my arms from racing ahead of my body before impact. Hips are getting open, but feel like my upper body is not rotating fast enough. Having trouble keeping my arms from racing ahead of my body before impact. Hips are getting open, but feel like, well, you have two you can't have both of those things. I'm a little bit confused by your question. You're saying you're having trouble your arms racing in front of your body, but your hips are open. So it's got to be one or the other. Your hips can't be open, because if your hips are open, then your arms can't race unless you're just basically just swinging over the top, right? So my answer to that question would be to work through the 20-minute shallowing fix, because you just need to get the club shallowing out. It's way, way, way more important to get the club shallowing out than it is to get the hips open. So that I would focus more on that than the hips opening up. Or maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but it doesn't make sense that you would get your hips open, but your arms would be racing in front of your body. So if you think about it this way, this is what I'm envisioning. Your hips are open, but your arms are racing in front. Like, I don't know how you could hit the ball doing that, right? So that'd be like a way over the top swing. So the solution to that would be to work through the 20-minute shallowing fix. So Greg O says, as you extend through the golf shot in the fall through coming out of flex position during the downswing, do you feel this occurs primarily with the left leg rather than both legs? Could you speak to the timing of this extension? Yeah, so it's going to be coming from the legs. It can come from the trail leg. It's going to be mostly the lead leg, but it can come from the trail leg a little bit. But yeah, like I said, it's going to be mostly the lead leg and then the extension of the hip. So basically this motion here, right? So that's hip extension. So if you imagine I'm making the angle between my legs and my upper body bigger, right? So that's what extends you up and through. And then as we come down, right, this lead leg is going to flex in as we go up to the top, right? So when I go up to the top of the swing, my left leg is going to flex, right? And then when I start my downswing, it's going to stay flexed, and then it's going to bow out, right? And then from there, it's going to be around this lead arm parallel position, or a little bit later, is when it's going to start extending and straightening out. And then as I come down into here, my hips are going to start extending up and through as I come around into the full finish. So where that's starting, it's starting about lead arm parallel or a little bit later in the downswing is when that extension of that lead leg is starting. So David A says, how do you determine what the proper grip, strong, weak, etc.? The best indicator that your grip might need adjusting is the result of a shot. But what if you want to be drawing the ball more and think that to get the result, your grip needs to be stronger, when in fact the unwanted shot results is because of some other factor in your swing? I think it's the lesson about shallowing that Clay talks about, the anatomical difference in how far people can bend their wrist, about how many people can naturally bend their wrist to close to 90 degrees. Unless I'm misunderstanding what he's saying, I think he advises that for those who can't do that, it might call for a stronger grip. Yeah, so basically what I would say is you're exactly right. The best indicator of how strong or weak your grip is going to be your ball flight, right? So if the ball isn't drawing, right? If you want to hit a draw and it's not drawing, then a stronger grip, if you change nothing else, right? A stronger grip would get the face more closed. All things equal, the ball would start drawing, right? If you want to draw more, you just strengthen the grip more, right? If you're overdrawing the ball, what you can do is weaken the grip. So yeah, that's really the easiest way. And yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly what Clay was talking about. Most people have trouble doing like the Dustin Johnson bowed wrist, which if you have a weak grip, right? If you have a very weak grip and you want a pro-like impact, then you're going to have to bow the wrist if you want that. And if you can't do that, or if that's a very difficult thing for you to do, it's just a lot easier to strengthen the grip, right? So if you strengthen the grip, now you don't have to have a bowed wrist because the club face is going to be more closed. You don't have to bow it to close it. So it's all about club face control. So really what it comes down to is you're exactly right. The ball flight is going to be the indicator. If you want to have the face more closed, strengthen the grip. If you want to have the face more open, weaken the grip. So Greg O says, I have maintained posture and shallowed the club. Why might I still be hitting behind the ball? It might be because you're releasing it into the ground. So if you imagine this, if I'm coming down, I'm in my posture. I have this club shallowed out, but if I just release it from here, I'm going to hit the ground way behind the ball, right? So you're probably just releasing the club early. You could be over shallowing out the club, right? So you can over shallow out the club. You can overdo, a good thing. Most people are coming down steep, so it'd be very difficult for them to over shallow it. They can shallow it as much as they possibly can, and it may get them to where they want to go. But if you're over shallowing, if you imagine I have this club working too much from the inside, imagine I was set up here at home plate on a baseball diamond, and I was swinging 45 degrees out to the right toward first base. My club's going to bottom out more in front of my trail foot, right? So that can lead to fat shots. So I would look at your release, and I would look at, if you're over shallowing out the club, those would be a couple things that would lead to fat shots. So we want to have that club releasing out in front, about 45 degrees out in front. If you want to work on that release, I would work through the straight line release section. So if you imagine this way, if I'm here in my posture, club shallowed out, release it, hit the ground. If I'm here and then I release it a lot later, right, I'm going to hit the ground way up here, right? So you could have, and it could also be a combination of those two things. You could be shallowing it out too much and then also be releasing it too early. So I would just tone down how much you're shallowing, feel like you're not shallowing so much. And then you can work through the 20-minute shallowing fix to get, to get the club releasing a little bit more out in front to help you hit the ground more in front of the ball. All right, keep the questions coming. All right, so Don says Clay talks about putting an object on the ground to give feedback in trying to shallow out, but what are the things we need to do at the top to ensure we are coming down under the proper plane? Well, a lot of that's going to depend on your swing. It's really just easiest to just put the thing on the ground and then just swing to avoid it. You don't need to think about everything. If you're thinking too internally about what things are going on, then it's not necessarily going to lead to shallowing out the club, right? I can do a lot of things at the top of the swing that help shallow out the club, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to shallow out the club. So what I'd recommend doing is just put it on the ground and then go as slow as you have to go to avoid it. To avoid hitting it. And you'll instinctually get the club where it needs to be. What you need to do, what I need to do, what anyone else needs to do at the top of the swing is going to be different. It really depends on how you're bringing the club up, how you're managing this club, right? What needs to happen is this club needs to work down from here. If you look on the best golfers in the world, right? You're going to see all kinds of takeaways. You're going to see a takeaway that goes way out here. You're going to see a takeaway that goes inside. You're going to see a takeaway that's perfect. You're going to see the club in different positions. You're going to see, John Rahm is like this. Dustin Johnson's like this. Tiger is like this. You're going to see all kinds of different positions. So those golfers need to do different things in the downswing to get that club to shallow out, right? Not all of those golfers are going to be doing the same thing, right? So what we want to understand is that, what you need to do, what I need to do, what somebody else needs to do. So you have to kind of come up with your own recipe of things that need to happen. So what ideally what we would want to have happen is you'd want to have the shallowing of the club happen with your upper body, and the lower body doesn't shallow out the club. The lower body actually steepens the club because you rotate, and then those things neutralize, right? So let me explain it this way. If I do nothing and I just rotate my body, see how that steepens the club, right? So if I stay in my posture and I really rotate, that's going to steepen the club. So, and we want to do that. We want to get the body rotating, but we need to have the club shallowing out as well, right? So you want to shallow out the club with the upper body, rotate with the lower body. Rotation steepens the club. You neutralize it with shallowing of the upper body. So if you think about it, if I kind of go through each piece, there's several things that shallow out the club with the upper body. One would be your wrist angle. So if I bow my wrist and extend my trail wrist, you can see how that shallows out the club, right? You don't necessarily need to do that, but that's one thing that you can do to help shallow out the club. Rotation in my forearm. So if you imagine, you can almost think of this as like turning a doorknob, right? If I hold my elbows to my side and I turn my I turn my forearms, that shallows out the club, right? So if I hold it like this, that shallows out the club. In my shoulder joints, I can externally rotate my trail shoulder. That's losing an arm wrestling contest. I can internally rotate my left shoulder. That's winning an arm wrestling contest, right? So if I do those, right, you see how my elbows, basically that's going to be pointing my elbows back down toward the ball. That also shallows out the club. My spine is going to shallow out the club, right? So if I keep my hips level and then I tilt my spine, right, that shallows out the club. If I don't do anything else but tilt my spine, that shallows out the club. If I lower if I have the club like this and I lower my arms, right, that shallows out the club. So all those things, if I did all those things, if I maxed out every single one of those pieces, right, all of those things, so there's my spine, there's my wrist angles, there's a bowing, I maximize all those things. That's too shallowed out, right? I'm going to hit the ground way behind the golf ball, right? So you have to come up with your recipe that does that. So that's why we're not talking about every little thing that you can do, because everyone's going to be a little bit different. But if you put the obstacle down and put it in your way, you swing to avoid that, you're going to do some sort of recipe of that to make that happen. So Z says, I have a silly question about grip and how it relates to forward shaft lean at contact. Is one grip type better than another grip to help this? Oblique versus transverse grip. Oblique versus transverse grip of the shaft with the left hand. I'm not familiar with those terms, oblique versus transverse grip. But anyway, no, not one is any better than any other one. What I will say is that what we want to understand is that releasing the club, that closes the club face, right? So releasing the club closes the face, lagging the club opens the face, right? So if we have the club face open as we're coming down, we're going to tend to release it earlier to square it up, right? Whereas if the face is more closed, I can keep more lag on this club and get my hands more in front at impact. So it's not that one grip is better than the other. It's about what works best for you. So some players are going to be better at bowing the wrist. If you have a weak grip and you want to have forward shaft lean at impact, you're going to have a bowed wrist, right? So if that impact position, so if you think about like Colin Morikawa looks like this at impact, right? This is what Colin Morikawa's wrist looks like at impact. Colin Morikawa has a very weak grip. at impact, he has to have a lot of bow on his wrist to have the shaft lean and compression that he's looking for. Not the easiest thing for most people to do. I would say most people are going to benefit from more of a neutral to strong grip because that's more difficult to do. If I have a neutral grip, right, then my wrist is going to be more in kind of a flat position at impact. And if I have a very strong grip, I can actually have a little bit of cupping in my wrist at impact. I can have a little bit of cupping there in my wrist at impact and get away with it. So it really depends on what you're the best at. If you're really good at if you're most comfortable with, a flat to slightly cupped wrist, then I would say a neutral to strong grip is going to be the best for most players to get shaft lean. But if you're most comfortable with having a bowed wrist, then a weak grip is going to be the best thing for you. But what most amateurs have, what I see most amateurs have is they have a weak grip and then they release it early. So what they do is they'll have a weak grip where the thumb is kind of going down the top of the shaft. They'll come in and they'll be like this at impact because they have to do that to square the face. You can see how my wrist has some cup in it here, right? So if I were to just have my hands more in front and keep that cup in my wrist, you can see how that face opens up, right? So what I would need to do to have my hand in front with this weak grip is I would need to bow that wrist. Now you can see I have a bowed wrist in a square face. Difficult for most people to do. So I would say the vast majority of golfers are going to be better off having a neutral to strong grip, because that's going to be the most natural wrist angles that most people are going to be able to accomplish. So Don says, okay, those last strategies were what I was looking for. Thanks. I think I saw a video one time about those things, but I just couldn't remember them. No problem, Don. Glad to help. So Rolf N says, what is the difference in setup for a distance wedge versus a finesse wedge, 40 to 60 yards? So to me, those are interchangeable terms. A distance wedge and a finesse wedge, those are the same thing, to me anyway. So if they mean something different to you, let me know what that means. But a distance wedge and a finesse wedge. So when I'm saying what I would call a distance wedge would be a wedge that you are trying to hit a certain distance, right? You're trying to, it's not a full swing, right? It's a gauged swing. So, if your normal full swing with a wedge is 100 yards, anything that's basically under 100 yards would be a distance wedge, right? And I would call a finesse wedge the same exact thing. So there's no difference between the two, at least in my eyes. If there is if there's a difference with you, let me know what that is, and I can talk about maybe what the setup difference is, if there is any. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, a distance wedge and a finesse wedge are the same thing. So Don says, I'm a little confused about the release. Clay talks about releasing at about 45 degrees out from the ball and a little to the right, but how will the ball receive the maximum energy unless we are releasing at the ball? Maybe I am confused about what definition of release is. So what we're talking about release, what we're talking about is that the club head is passing in front of the hands, right? So in the release, the club head's actually decelerating. So you wouldn't want, when we hit, it's not fast. So when we're releasing it out in front, right? So we're here, we're coming in, that club head is accelerating into the ball, right? It's going to be fastest at the bottom here, right? And then it releases out in front. When in that release right here, it's moving slower than it was over here. It's decelerating to that point. It's not the fastest at that point. Yep, no problem. All right. How do pros create lag? So first, what we want to understand is what exactly gives that appearance of lag. So there's really three things. So number one is what a lot of people think of when they think of lag, and they think of that thumbs up position. So the technical term for this is what's called radial deviation. So it's where I'm getting my thumb to point up as much as I can. So if I have my club like this and I go thumbs up as much as I can, you can see how that creates, and I keep a neutral wrist position. So I'm not cupping my wrist to create a bigger angle. I'm just keeping my wrist pretty flat here. So you can see that creates, I don't know, about a 70-degree angle there, right? So that's not a ton of lag though, right? That's, there's lots of players that have way more lag than that. So it comes from some other aspects. Another thing that creates lag, and a lot of people don't think about this, but shallowing out the club creates that angle of lag, right? So if you imagine, if I have this club straight up and down and I have it toward me as much as I can, right? And then now I'm going to go like this, right? So if you look at this from this angle, see how that angle gets smaller? I'm not making my wrist lag it more. I'm lagging it just as much, but because I've shallowed out the club, now it's creating a sharper angle there, right? I can create a really sharp angle. Look, I have a 25-degree angle of lag here because I've shallowed it out. So that's another thing that creates that angle. And then the last thing is the change in direction, right? So I'm going to get this club going this way. My hands are going to be going that way. The club head is going to continue to go that way. Now the momentum of my club head is going to continue to go back as my hands go forward, and that creates a sharper angle of lag. That change in direction creates the sharper angle of lag. So the thumbs up, the wrist hinge, right? Radial deviation, that creates lag. The shallowing of the club creates that appearance of lag, of more lag, and then the change in direction, the momentum of the club creates that angle of lag as well. So if I put all those things together, I can create a crazy sharp angle of lag. So yeah, I'm going to let this club go into thumbs up. I'm going to have a change of direction, and I'm going to shallow it a ton, right? So now you can see I'm able to create a crazy angle of lag from doing that. So that's really what's going on there. All the best players, they shallow out the club, right? And all the best players have a nice change in direction typically at the top of the swing. If you look at the players that have the most lag, like Sergio Garcia, he shallows out the club about more than anybody. If you watch him coming down, you're going to see that club is basically perpendicular to his body. It's like this coming down. It's really, really shallowed out. He also has a very much of a change of direction as he's coming down. Now, one other thing to note, not all players have a big, huge angle of lag. Dustin Johnson would be an example of that. If you look at his swing, when he's coming down, he's at the top like this, right? I can't quite make as long a swing as he can, but he's at the top like this. And then as he's coming down, he's like this, right? So typically where that angle of lag is the smallest is about that lead arm parallel position, or sometimes a little bit later in the downswing. That's where we see the best players have the most lag. But if you look at Dustin, right, obviously works really well for him. If you look at him at the top, he basically maintains the same amount of lag from the top of the swing to that lead arm parallel position, and then it starts to slowly release from there. Well, why does he not create a lot of lag? And the reason is because of his wrist angles, right? We all know that Dustin Johnson bows his wrist like crazy at the top. Well, if you bow your wrist like crazy from an anatomical standpoint, it's very, very difficult for your thumb to go into that, or for your wrist to go into that thumbs up position, right? So you can actually test this yourself, right? If I go like this, right, I bow my wrist a ton, so I have as much bow in my wrist as I can. Now I'm going to go thumbs up as much as I can, right? That's going to make it, that's as much as I can do. I can't create that angle that I had earlier, right? Now on the other side of that, if I cup my wrist a ton, right? If I cup my wrist a ton, I can actually go into more thumbs up, right? So now I'm going to cup my wrist, and now you look, I can create more lag here. If I flatten it out, it's more like that, and if I bow it, it's more like that, right? So keep in mind that if you're someone who's choosing to have a weak grip and you're wanting to bow your wrist a ton, you're not going to have as much lag as a Sergio Garcia unless your wrists are just crazy flexible in some way, right? You're just not going to have a crazy angle of lag here. So this is another Another point that I would say in the favor of a stronger grip, because if you have a stronger grip, you can afford to have a little bit of cupping in your wrist. Now, you can't go crazy. And the reason is that, if you cup your wrist a ton, look what happens to the club face. See how it opens a bunch, right? So if we open the club face a lot, that's gonna lead to issues, right? You're gonna tend to slice, and you're gonna tend to early release it by the time you get to the ball to get the club face closed. So if we have a strong grip, we can afford to have a little bit of cupping in that wrist, and that can help you to actually create more lag. So a really good example of this would be Matthew Fitzpatrick. Matthew Fitzpatrick has a very, very strong grip. His hand's basically on the grip like this. He has a lot of lag, and he's bringing it back, and he keeps a little bit of cupping in that wrist. That's basically how much he has. If you go crazy with it, you can overdo it, but you can afford to have a little bit of cupping there, right? So the moral of the story here is that when you look at the best players, they're creating it with three things. Number one, thumbs up. Number two, shadowing. And number three, change of direction. But I want you to be careful when you're working on lag to not cup your wrist a ton to try to create that crazy lag angle, because that's actually going to lead to issues. You're not going to know where the club face is, and it's not going to make you better, unfortunately. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that club face in a good position while you're getting the lag. So if you want to work on your lag, I would actually recommend that you work through our top speed golf system, and we have a top speed lag course. There's 3 levels to it. Start in level 1, then work through level 2, level 3, and you'll start getting that lag. Lots of great drills in there to help you train this motion. And also on the other side of that, what I mentioned, shallowing out the club. If you're struggling with shallowing out the club, that can also lead to not getting that sharp angle of lag. So that's another place that I would go to work on. You're not necessarily directly working on lag, but you're going to get the appearance of more lag because the club's going to be shallowing out more if you work through our 20-minute shallowing fix course. Excuse me. So to get to either one of those courses, you can select the instruction tab. To get to 20-minute shallowing fix, just select the 20-minute shallowing fix from the drop down, and then you can select the top speed golf system, then the top speed lag course to get to the lag course. All right, let's keep going. All right, so Mickey S says, one of the first moves to begin the downswing is to bend and weight into the left leg. What is a good drill to coordinate when you begin to straighten the left leg? Well, it starts to straighten from that lead arm parallel position, right? So if a good drill to work on it would just be to kind of break things down and go slow, right? So go up to the top, shift into the lead side, get that lead arm to parallel, pause there, and then start to straighten out, and then try to blend that into a more fluid swing instead of a pausing swing. So Michael says 2 clubs moving at 100 miles per hour won't hit the ball the same speed of one is accelerating and one is decelerating. The force and accelerating club will have higher ball speed, distance. Force is keyword. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Michael. Appreciate it. What is the easiest way to get more club head speed and distance? Well, I can say this from experience, all the distance clinics that we've done, and I would say more than 90%, if not more than 90%, get more club head speed or get more gains, increase their club head speed more by basically increasing the turn of their body, right? What I see a lot of golfers doing is they're kind of restricting their turn. They don't have a freedom of turn. They're not really getting a good power turn like we talk about in the power turn section of the top speed golf system. And it could be because we're afraid of getting wild or whatever it might be. We're afraid of moving things too much, too many degrees of freedom. But if you look at the best players and the longest hitters, they're all moving. They're all letting their feet move. They're letting their knees move. They're letting their hips turn, their shoulders turn, right? If you look at Jack Nicklaus, Sam Snead, you look at all these players, modern day players as well, Bubba Watson, you look at all the really, really long players, they're letting things move around, right? So what I mean is what I see a lot of golfers do is they'll be really square with their feet, and they try not to let their knees move very much, and subsequently their hips won't move very much. Then they won't get much of a shoulder turn. So I see a lot of driver swings that kind of look like this, right? Well, this just isn't going to be very powerful, right? So this is really the number one thing that we can do is to kind of unlock these things. Well, why does this cause you to not swing as fast? Well, we want to be able to create as much space for the club to accelerate, right? The more space we have for the club to accelerate, the more club head speed that we can generate. So I would think about it this way. If you're getting on the interstate, you want to have a nice long ramp to be able to get up to speed on the interstate. If that ramp was really, really short, it'd be very, very difficult for you to get up to speed. It'd be dangerous too, right? Because you'd be getting onto the interstate going 30 and everybody else is going 70, right? So we want to create lots of space and time to accelerate the club to make things a little bit easier. So that's going to come from getting your feet to move, getting your knees to move, getting your hips to move, getting your shoulders to move, right? So if we start with the feet, well, the first thing I would do with the feet is I would flare them out. The reason is that when we turn, right, our trail leg is doing something that's called internal rotation. So you think of that as pigeon toeing, right? If you think about it in the other way, if I'm doing this, right, if I don't move my hips, that's me basically doing this. Now, me personally, I actually have somewhat of a limitation in my hips. I can't really internally rotate very much. So I can't really pigeon toe very much, right? If I were to stand here and try to turn my foot in as much as I can, it's almost laughable. It's maybe 20 degrees that I can turn my hip in. It's not very much, right? So if I set up pigeon toed like this, I wouldn't be able to rotate my hips whatsoever. So if you flare out the feet, that just makes it easier for you to turn your hip into your leg. You have more freedom to turn your hip. So that's number one that I would do. And then when we start the backswing, we want to go ahead and let our knees move, right? So our trail knee is going to straighten out, right? It's going to straighten out a little bit. It doesn't, I'm not saying you got to hyperextend it, lock it out. We don't want to lock it out. We just want to straighten it out to push our hip back and around. We also, this is probably the biggest one that I see. We want to let our left knee, our lead knee, move in and flex in, right? What I see a lot of people do is they try to keep that knee in one spot. They try to keep that knee there, and that's going to restrict your hips, right? So go ahead and let that knee move in. Almost feel like it's moving back behind the golf ball. And then with that, our heel will likely come off the ground a little bit. So again, if you look at my feet are flared out, I'm going to straighten out my trail lead, let my lead knee move in. I'm going to let my heel come off the ground. Now look at how much I'm able to get my hips to turn. Now look at how much I'm able to get my shoulders to turn. And now I'm in a very, very powerful position at the top of the swing to be able to create some speed. So this is what Clay talks about in the 20-minute distance fix. This is actually the first drill that you do in the 20-minute distance fix. And the reason is because it's really the number one thing that you can do to help you create club head speed. A lot of times I've seen golfers gain as much as 20 miles per hour by doing this. Now, I'm not saying it's typical results. Those were golfers that basically just didn't turn at all. Their golf swings looked like this. And then they finally did that and they gained 20 miles per hour. Now that's a lot. That's 40 plus yards of distance that you're going to get. But typically I would say the average would be about 5 miles per hour that somebody gains, right? So 5 miles per hour, that's about 12 yards off the tee. And who wouldn't want 12 more yards off the tee? Now that doesn't mean there aren't other things out there that could get you more, but overall, all golfers that, if I'm picking the number one thing that any golfer can do, that's going to be it right there. So like I said, Clay talks about this in the 20-minute distance fix. It's actually the first drill that we do. We call it the catapult drill. If you want to go check it out, click the instruction tab, then 20-minute distance fix. It's that drill in week 1, that first drill. He also talks about it in the quick start a little bit. So, but the full on drill for getting a bigger turn is in that week 1 of the 20-minute distance fix. All right, let's keep going. So Byron M. So what is preferred spine angle at setup with a 9-iron? Clay talks about this in the stable fluid spine course, but generally you're going to be about 6 to 8 degrees, right? I assume you're talking about address. About 6 to 8 degrees is where you're going to want to be. So if this is straight up and down, this would be about 6 to 8 degrees. A really easy way to get into the perfect spine angle position would be to just take a club, just like I did here, put it down the center of your body. So it's going to be down shirt buttons all the way down to the belt buckle, right? I'm going to get my posture here, and then I'm just going to tilt my upper body here. I'm going to tilt my spine until the club just touches the inside of my leg. Now you can see here, I almost have a perfect 6 to 8 degrees of tilt. Now I'm in a perfect position here. Now with the driver, right, we tend to take a little bit wider of a stance. We're actually going to have just a little bit more tilt, right? So now with my drive, if this was my driver, this would be how much I would have there because the stance is a little bit wider. So that's a little trick to help you find that perfect that perfect spine angle. David A says, what is the difference in you swinging with a wedge to hit the ball different distances? The only real difference is just the length of the swing, right? That's really the only real difference. So if I'm hitting a 100-yard wedge, this would be how I would set up, right? I'd have a little bit narrower of a stance, right? This would be, and I would just take pretty close to a full swing, right? I don't like to take real big swings with wedges. Like I wouldn't swing my, this is just me personal preference, and I recommend this for most golfers, but if I'm hitting a 5-iron, I'm going to, my stance is going to be about like this, and I'm going to get a good full turn. That's going to be my that's going to be my 5-iron. But my full wedge is going to be stance a little bit narrower, right? And my backswing is going to be more like this. This is about as long of a backswing as I'm going to take. I'm not going to take as big of a backswing. The reason is that there really isn't any need to. I don't need, the only time I would do that is if I need to hit it really high and long for some reason. So let's say I have a tree I got to get over, and normally maybe I would hit like a pitching wedge or something like that from there, but my pitching wedge is going to fly too low. So maybe I'd hit my 50 degree and I might try to hit it harder and take a big swing with it, right? The reason why I don't like to do that is because there's really no reason to, and I would much rather have a lower, more controlled ball flight than a very high sky ball, right? And the other reason is that if you blade a 50 degree with a full-on swing, it's going to be much more detrimental than if you bladed a lower, a swing where you're not swinging as hard with lower loft, right? Because the leading edge isn't as sharp on the lower lofted club, right? So again, this would be if I had 100 yards. Typically, 100 yards is what I would do with my 54 degree. I could hit my 54 degree 120 probably if I took a full on swing with it, but I just don't like to. I like to kind of max it out there. So a 100-yard 54 degree would look something like this, right? This would be like my full swing. So 5-iron would be more like that, but this would be like basically a little above 3/4 swing would be like a full swing on that. Now, if I wanted to hit it 50 yards, it would be like this. Right? So it's really no different. It's really just the length of the swing changes. And that's what gives the different distances. Because you're just changing the speed at which you hit the ball with, and you change the speed by the length of your swing. And as long as you kind of keep the same rhythm and tempo of the swing, meaning I wouldn't take, if my 100-yard swing is like this, right? I'd want to take that same kind of rhythm with my 50-yard swing, right? I wouldn't take my 50-yard swing and go, like that, because I might hit it 80 yards, because I'm going harder through it. So as long as you kind of keep the same energy, as long as you're still applying the same amount of energy, if you apply the same amount of energy for a longer length of time, you're going to have more speed at the bottom, and that's going to make the ball go farther. So that's how you would really, control that. And if the best way that you can train it, they have a lot, the launch monitors these days, you can play games on it where it just spits out a distance, and then you have to try to hit it at that distance. That's a great way to train it. If you have something like that can do that, or if you have access to a TrackMan that can do that for you. But if you don't have that, just a deck of cards works really well as well. So you can take a deck of cards, take out all the face cards, and then you just draw a card, and then whatever the number is. So let's say it's a 4, right? Try to hit a 40-yard shot. So that way it's randomized, right? Try to hit a 40-yard shot. Then you draw another one, and it's a 7. Try to hit a 70-yard shot. You can even make it even more precise by making the red cards. You can make the red cards the number +0, and then you can make the black cards the number +5. So if you drew a black 5, it might be 55. If you drew a red 5, it would be 50, right? So you're hitting all these different distances and gaining a better feel for how to do that. So that'd be a way to help you to really be able to train. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the videos of tour players where they're on TrackMan and then they hit a shot and they guess the yardage, and a lot of times it's crazy, like how sometimes they're right on or like a yard off. Well, that's because they have incredible feel because they've trained it doing something like what I just talked about, right? They know the number. They know based on, because they've just put in all the repetitions. So that's what I'd recommend doing if you want to really be good at controlling those wedge distances. All right, let's keep going here. How do you stop thinning iron shots? Well, thinning iron shots comes from the bottom of your swing arc occurring at or before the golf ball. So the way you want to think about it here, I'll use the hula hoop. So our club comes down on an arc, right? So if my fist is the golf ball, if I'm thinning shots, this is how my club's coming down, right? My club's coming down, it's bottoming out where the ball is, or maybe it's even bottoming out before the ball. If I'm swinging in this direction, right? Maybe even it's bottoming out before the ball, it's grazing the grass and then actually working up into the ball. When we look at the best players at their contact, right, what we're going to see, and this has been measured in many, many players, is at the bottom of their swing arc, right? So where this tape is, the bottom of the swing arc is in front of a few inches and then slightly below the ball, right? So again, if I'm hitting this direction and my fist is the golf ball, that's what's happening. So you can see the club's arcing down, it's hitting the ground where the ball is, and then it's working into the ground. And you can imagine, there's a divot going from here to here, right? That's what's going on there. So if you're thinning it, we just need to get the low point of your swing, the bottom of your swing arc, to be more toward the target. Now, the number one thing that I see with people that struggle to do that is the compression line. So the compression line is the line that goes from our lead ankle, lead hip, lead shoulder. And it's called the compression line because if it's off, you're going to tend to hit thin, chunk, and top shots because it moves the bottom of your swing to be too far before the golf ball. So for an iron, for pretty much any shot that's hit off the turf, where did my golf balls go? For basically any shot that's hit off the turf, I want to see the ball position pretty close to the middle of the stance, or just slightly, like one ball forward of the middle of the stance. People push the ball position too far forward. I see a lot of the time. So put that ball position either in the middle or just forward of the middle. That in and of itself, a lot of times can help because that bottom of the swing arc is relative to the ball, right? So if I have the ball position here, right, and that's where my club's bottoming out. Well, now if I just move that ball position back here and I have the club bottom out in the same spot, well, now it's a few inches in front of the ball. So sometimes if your ball position is super far forward, you move it back toward the middle of your stance. A lot of times that just fixes it. So, keep that in mind. I would look and see what's going on there. An easy way, because a lot of people don't even realize that they're putting the ball so far forward. A way that you can kind of check it is take an alignment stick and then just straddle that alignment stick. Have it equally distant. Let me line it up with the camera here a little bit. Have it the same distance between your heels, right? and have it going straight out in front of you, your ball position should be basically somewhere like that, right? So either on the stick or the back of the ball on the stick, right? A lot of people, when they do this, that ball position is up there. It's way far in front, and then that's typically, what can lead to those thin shots, right? So let's go back to the compression line, what we were talking about there, right? Compression line that goes from lead ankle, lead hip, lead shoulder. This is at impact. So if my compression line is really far angled away, right, too far angled away, my club's going to bottom out more back here, right? I want for basically any shot that you're hitting off of the turf, I like to see that compression line to be vertical or maybe just a degree or two angled away. So make sure that when you're looking at this, you're looking from your ankle to your shoulder joint. It's not the outside of your shoulder. It's your shoulder socket. So it's your ankle joint to your hip joint to your shoulder joint. We want that to be in a nice straight line. So my shoulder joint's right there. If I'm coming in and I'm like this, my club's going to tend to bottom out before the ball, right? I want to have that more like this. See how it's basically, if I were to hang a club, straight down from my shoulder joint, you can see how that would go right through the middle of my ankle. That's what I want. That's going to help me to hit more down and through the ball. So the reason why you're not there could be several things going on there. It could be that you're not shifting your weight. It could be that you're hanging back because you're coming down steep and things like that. But those would be things I'd be looking at, getting that compression line to be more straight up and down at impact. Now with a driver, we can be more angled away, right? With a driver, I want to be angled away because I want to hit up on the ball. I want my club, my swing arc, to bottom out before the ball, so that way I can hit up on it. If I can hit up on it, I can get a higher launch and lower spin, which is going to help me to get more distance, right? But for an iron shot, we can't do that because the ground's in the way, right? I don't want to hit up on it. If I hit up on it, I'm going to hit the ground before the ball. I'm going to miss the ground and either top it or thin it. Best case scenario, I'm going to thin it, right? So I want to have that ball position more toward the middle. I want to have my compression line more straight up and down at impact, and that's going to allow you to get rid of those thin shots. One thing that you can do kind of as a drill is you can kind of exaggerate this a little bit, right? So take your stance as you normally would, and then exaggerate it. Just get your shoulder out in front of your ankle here, and you're going to be on your toes here, and just hit some shots from here. And you're going to be taking some deep divots when you do this, but it's going to help you get that feeling of what we want through the ball, right? And then go back to your normal stance position and try to replicate that same impact position. Now, literally, you're probably not going to end up like this, but the closer you can, you feeling like that is more than likely going to help you to get into that position. And then outside of that, what I would say is work through the compression line course. If you're coming down steep and that's why you're hanging back, then that could be part of it as well. Working through the 20-minute shallowing fix may help. So those would be two areas, that quick drill, the compression line course, and the 20-minute shallowing fix that can help you to get that working a little bit better. So to get to those courses, click the instruction tab. For the compression line course, you'd select the top speed golf system, then compression line. For the 20-minute shallowing fix, you'd select the 20-minute shallowing fix from that drop down. All right, so Don says, if you are trying to make your ball go higher on any given club, how would you do that? Do you do that by changing ball position, or are there other ways to do that? So there's basically two ways that you would do it, right? One is going to add more loft, right? So the way that you would add more loft would be basically just releasing the club more, right? So this would be, maybe this is kind of where your standard shot is, right? That's going to have a certain ball flight because the forward shaft lane is going to dictate, largely how high that ball goes, right? So now if I come in and I release it a little bit earlier, I'm going to have less shaft lane. That's going to be more loft. The ball will go higher, right? So that's one way you can do it. I'm not a big fan of moving the ball position really far forward because, again, that's going to lead to thin shots. When you hit it thin, it goes lower, right? So I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather you keep the ball position and either release it a little bit sooner, right? stand a little bit taller and feel like you're kind of releasing almost, you may even need to feel like you're kind of scooping it a little bit. Now, if you're literally coming in like this, it is going to lead to poor contact. But if you're normally like this, and then you come in more like this, where the shaft is pretty close to straight up and down, you'll be able to still be able to make some pretty good contact with it. But it's going to add the loft, and the ball can go higher, right? The other way that you can hit the ball higher is with more club head speed, right? So, if you have let's say you have a shot that's, I talked about this earlier where I was talking about the wedges, but let's say I had a 140-yard shot, right? Well, normally for me that's a pitching wedge. Well, I need to hit it higher because I got a tree in my way. Well, if I take that pitching wedge and I release it earlier to try to hit it higher, because I'm adding more loft, it's actually not going to go as far, right? So I would actually need to hit a 9-iron, and again, a 9-iron is going to have less loft, so it's not going to go very high. So in that situation, what I would do is I would club down and then try to hit the ball with more speed. So that's going to help me to hit it really high, right? So clubbing down adds more loft, and then hitting it with more speed adds more height, right? The reason why it adds more height is because I'm giving the ball more energy, right? So imagine if I launch the ball at the same angle, right? So I'm launching it at this angle, and I hit it with one ball, I hit it with enough speed for it to kind of climb into the air, maybe to the bottom of this grip, right? Well, if I hit it with more speed, it's going to continue to climb up in the air. It's going to go higher and higher and higher and higher, right? So that's two ways to do it, right? If you're needing to retain your distance, you basically need to kind of muscle up on a club. You need to swing harder with a higher lofted club. So club down and swing with more speed to make it go higher. If you don't need it to go farther, then you can do it by kind of releasing the club, or you can do it, with if I need to hit it high, if it's a shorter shot, I may open the face a little bit even, right? So that'd be kind of like a flop shot, opening the face a little bit. That adds some loft, right? So those would be a couple ways that you can make the ball go higher. So Mike S says, what are the initial feels with shallowing the club? Is it the movement or right elbow to your side? Feels are relative, so I can't really tell you what the feels are. Your feels, my feels, what you need to feel, what I need to feel are going to be two completely different things. So to answer your question, I don't really know. But if you're seeing your elbow, if you go up to the top and your elbow's like this and it's staying out, then yeah, sure, you may need to feel that right elbow kind of staying in, and because that's going to help you to shallow out the club. David A says, if you don't take a full swing with a pitching wedge, but you do take a full swing with a 9-iron, won't that create a big gap in the distance you hit those two clubs? How do you make up the difference? So I do take a full swing with a pitching wedge. I don't generally take a full, basically if it a really low lofted wedge. So I don't take a full swing with my 58 or my 54. I will with my 50. But to bridge the gap, you just choke up on the club. So that's really what I would do is I just choke up on the lower lofted club. So to bridge the gap between my 50 degree and my 54 degree, right? Because there's a pretty big gap there. My 50 degree, I can hit it 130 yards, right? And I don't like to hit my 54 degree more than more than 100 yards. So that's a 30-yard gap. That's a pretty big gap. So basically, excuse me, basically I'd be hitting, if I want to take a little bit off of a club, I'm going to choke up on it. Or I'm going to take a slower swing, or not a slower swing, but it ends up being a slower swing, but a shorter swing. So let's say I had a 110-yard shot. What I would do is I would take my 50 degree, I would choke up on it, and I'd take about a 3/4 swing. I know that that's about 110 yards. If I need to hit a 120-yard shot, I'm going to choke up on it and just take a normal swing. If I need to hit 130 yards, I'm going to use the full length of the club, and I'm going to So I bridge the gap by choking up on the club or taking a shorter swing to create less speed. So Greg P says, completed the 20-minute shallowing course many times. It will do well with all clubs except the driver. If I do get the driver to hook, it is generally low and barely goes to the right as well. I'm right-handed, but with 3-wood and hybrids, I really must watch or I'm overhooking without trying. Any suggestions? Thanks in advance. All right, so let's talk about that. So I can shallow my irons, but I can't shallow my driver. Any idea why? So the reason is that we actually need to shallow out the driver more than we do with the irons. And that has to do with the ball position, right? So if I bring out my hula hoop here, if you imagine my club is arcing around my body, right? If my ball position is in the middle of my stance with an iron, or even slightly forward of that, right? If I swing in this direction, it's shallowed out. My club's working from the inside. And when it gets to the ball, the club's working slightly from the inside. But now, if my ball position is where my left hand is, and I swing in the same direction, I shallow it out the same, my club's going to come around. It's going to turn the corner at where my iron ball position is, and then it's going to start to work to the left when it gets to the ball. Well, if my club's working to the left and I have the club face closed, I'm going to hit a hook. It's going to be a left and left shot, right? So what I have to do is I actually have to shallow out the club more with my driver, right? So now my club's working from the inside, and now it's turning the corner at the driver. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, why not just put the ball position, in the center of the stance with the driver? Well, the problem with that is that we want to get high launch and low spin with the driver. That's going to allow us to hit it farther, right? If we hit down on the driver, that's going to typically lead to you hitting down on the driver. It's going to lead to you hitting it with having more shaftling with the driver. And that's going to be hitting down on it. It's going to add spin and hit it lower, and that's going to be less conducive to distance, right? So we want to hit up on it, so that way we can get the high launch, low spin for distance. So what we need to do is we need to get the club shallowing out more with the driver. So there's another thing with the driver that because of the ball position that can make it more difficult. And that is when the ball position is more forward, we're going to tend to square up our upper body more to the left, right? So if I exaggerate it, if my ball position is more up here, right, my shoulders and my hips and even my knees sometimes will kind of point. I'm going to exaggerate, but you can see how I'm pointing everything kind of where the ball would be. Well, if my shoulders and everything are kind of opened up, I'm going to tend to swing over the top when I do that, right? So you can do, actually, John Rahm does this whenever he generally likes to hit a fade, but sometimes he'll hit a draw when he needs to. He demonstrated this at the Masters when there's a couple holes where he really need to hit a draw. Well, what he does is he has the ball forward in his stance, but he'll actually put the club down where he would with an iron. Like, so imagine if he was hitting an iron, he would put the club there. This allows him to very, very easily square up his shoulders. So here would be where, like, a lot of people set up, they're opened up, right? He puts it there. Now my body is more squared off, and then now I'm going to more easily be able to swing from the inside. So you can try that, the John Rahm thing, and see if that helps. But basically what you need to do is you need to work through the 20-minute shallowing fix with the driver. You do the same drills with the driver. And if you do the same drills with the driver, it's going to get you shallowing out the club more with the driver, because if you set up the barrier, like the impact bag, like Clay does in drill number 2 of the 20-minute shallowing fix, right? It's going to force you to get that club shallowing out to the ball, right? But you can certainly try putting it more behind, and that's going to make it easier for you to swing from the inside, right? So it's just more difficult with the driver because of the ball position. We have to shallow it out more. It makes it a little bit difficult. So just exaggerate it, work through the drill with the driver, because you can't shallow it the same with the iron. Try the John Rahm thing, and it should help you to start drawing your driver as well. All right, so we got one more here. How do I stop rushing the downswing? Well, typically when I see people rushing the downswing, it's because they're starting their downswing with almost all of their pressure on their trail foot, right? So they get up to the top, they're all loaded up, almost all of their weight's on their trail foot. So they're ready to start the downswing, but they don't have pressure in their lead foot. So what they end up doing is they just start down with the arms. And then by then it just feels like everything's rushed to the ball, right? So what we want to have is we want to get some momentum moving toward the target as we're getting up to the top. So that way we can get pressure into the ground with the lead foot and start the downswing that way. So imagine this. If I were to throw this ball, if I was a baseball pitcher and I were to throw this ball, right? I was up here and I had everything kind of over here and I started my arm forward from here. It's just not going to be very powerful. I'm going to feel like I'm trying to rush as much as I can to try to get any power on it, right? Whereas a baseball pitcher, they'll get up here. They don't get leaning too far this way. They get their momentum of their body starts working forward toward the target as their arm goes back. Every single baseball pitcher is like this. Arm goes back, momentum goes forward. Now my momentum's going forward. My arm's starting to move forward as my momentum's going forward. Now I can push into the ground and leverage myself and let it go. And I'm going to be able to get more power, right? So that's the same thing I want to do in the golf swing, right? I want to sync up my pressure that I'm putting into the ground with how I'm swinging, right? So I want to get a pressure off the ball into my trail foot. I'm going to throw the club back. And then as I'm throwing the club back, I want to start getting my momentum moving forward. And that way I can start moving pressure into my lead foot. I can start the downswing from there. Now everything just seems like it's more in sync and I don't feel like I'm rushing anything, right? So a great drill to work on this is the step drill. And it's going to probably feel awkward for a lot of you at first if you have this rushing of the swing feeling, but just slow it down and break it down and work through it like this, and you'll get better at it. So what we'll do is we'll start with our feet together. We'll put the club in front. You swing this club back, right? So you apply some pressure in your trail foot, swing this club back. As the club's swinging back, you're going to start stepping forward. And I want you to time that point at which you put your foot on the ground with getting to the top of the swing. So in super slow motion, it would look like this. Pressure, I'm going to throw it back. As I'm throwing it back, I'm going to start stepping forward. I'm going to land at the top of the swing, and then I'm going to push down and rotate all the way through, right? So do this without a golf ball. You can go in the backyard and try this. See if you can get this down before you try to go to the range and then try to work it again at the range. But that's what we want. That's what we want to do. So I'm going to choke up on this club here. And I'm going to pressure this way, throw it back, step down, and throw through. That's going to really help you to get some good rhythm and flow and good tempo in your swing. And you're not going to feel like you're rushing the swing anymore if you can get pressure into that lead foot to start the downswing. So work on that step drill and then work on getting that same feeling in a practice swing without stepping, right? So again, I'm going to imagine like I'm doing the step drill, but I'm going to have my normal stance. Right. So what I'll do is I'll point the club in front. I'll shift to my trail side. We'll throw it back. And then I'm going to start shifting to my lead side. I'm going to feel like I'm landing into my lead foot. I'm going to feel like I'm starting to get pressure into my lead foot before I start my downswing. Right. So here and there. Now I'm moving forward and coming around into the full finish. And then I'm just going to try to apply that same thing with a golf ball. And you'll be surprised at how much more rhythm and flow and how much good tempo you have when you do this. You're not going to feel like you're rushing anymore. So give that a try. And it should help out with the rushing the downswing for sure. All right. We'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. We'll be back here Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next time.